The story unfolds with a man in his late 20s, who recently received a significant bonus at work. Motivated by the desire to celebrate his parents' anniversary and to reconnect with his family, he decides to treat them to a dream vacation in Hawaii. This destination is particularly meaningful as it is where his parents went for their honeymoon. He meticulously plans a week-long trip, covering all expenses from flights to activities, envisioning it as a heartfelt gift for his family. The man is close to his younger brother, but his relationship with his younger sister, Bonnie, has always been rocky. Bonnie, the baby of the family, has exhibited entitled behavior, often resulting in tension among the siblings. Despite this, he is hopeful that the vacation will help strengthen their family bonds. When he announces the trip, the initial reaction from his parents and brother is one of excitement and gratitude, particularly from Bonnie, who immediately begins discussing all the activities she wants to do and even the Instagram content she plans to create. However, this enthusiasm quickly turns sour when Bonnie starts demanding to take over the trip planning, claiming he is not good at it. Frustrated by her entitlement, he explains that he wants to manage the trip himself since it is his treat and he has budget constraints he needs to adhere to. Bonnie's insistence on planning causes tension, but he tries to keep the peace, telling her that he will reveal some surprises closer to the date to maintain an element of excitement. As the vacation approaches, Bonnie's behavior escalates. She becomes increasingly upset about not being involved in planning and eventually pressures him to share the itinerary. When he reluctantly gives in and shares the details, she becomes furious about certain aspects and suggests changes. Although some of her suggestions are reasonable, the man starts to feel that if anything goes wrong, Bonnie will blame him, further complicating their relationship. Seeking to appease her, he allows her to make some changes on the condition that she consult him first, hoping to mitigate her complaints. Despite these precautions, a week before the trip, Bonnie takes it upon herself to cancel some of the planned activities and replace them with her own choices, asserting that she has now taken full control of the trip. The man is outraged, feeling that she has completely hijacked his thoughtful gift. He tries to reason with her, but Bonnie accuses him of being controlling and hangs up on him. That evening, the man receives a call from his parents, who have sided with Bonnie after she reported the disagreement. They express concern over what they perceive as his attempt to undermine Bonnie's enthusiasm. Despite explaining his side of the story and the effort he put into planning the trip, his parents insist that Bonnie's excitement is more important. Feeling unsupported and frustrated, the man contemplates his next steps, realizing that his intentions to create a memorable family experience have been overshadowed by his sister's demands and entitlement. Ultimately, he decides to take back control of the trip, leading to him canceling Bonnie's ticket and choosing to proceed with the vacation without her. This decision, while difficult, reflects his need to reclaim his initial vision for the trip and to avoid further conflict with Bonnie, who had shown no respect for the effort he had put in to create a special experience for the family. The situation with my sister, Bonnie, had become increasingly tense leading up to our family trip to Hawaii. Initially, I had taken the lead in planning this trip, investing my time and money to ensure it would be a memorable experience for everyone. However, Bonnie's attempts to take control frustrated me. She disregarded my efforts and seemed oblivious to the money I had already put into the trip. When I expressed my concerns to our family, they brushed them aside, insisting that what mattered was that we were family and should enjoy our time together, no matter who was in charge. In a moment of frustration, I considered canceling the trip altogether. However, I chose to take a step back instead. I thought, if Bonnie wanted to take charge so desperately, I would let her. I resolved to simply enjoy the trip, even if it wasn't how I had envisioned it. But then, 2 days before we were set to leave, everything took a turn for the worse. I received a notification that my flight tickets had been canceled. Confused and frustrated, I immediately contacted the airline and discovered that the cancellation had originated from my account. It didn't take long for me to suspect Bonnie's involvement. When I called her in anger, she answered nonchalantly, as if it was a joke. When I confronted her, she chuckled and said, "Oh yeah, I did that. Isn't that funny?" I was furious and demanded an explanation. She told me, "We can't have you on the trip. You're too controlling, and your negative attitude would ruin the vacation for everyone." She claimed to have discussed this with the family, stating they all agreed I wasn't worth the trouble. I was in disbelief. The trip I had planned and paid for was suddenly happening without me, all because my sister had manipulated the situation. In that moment, I felt something snap inside me. I couldn't allow her to walk all over me. I logged into my account, canceled Bonnie's ticket, rebooked it in my name, and changed the password to prevent her from making any further changes to our travel itinerary. I sent a message to the family group chat, stating that since Bonnie thought I wasn't welcome on the trip I was funding, I had canceled her ticket and would gladly cancel anyone else's if they chose to support her. The fallout was immediate. My brother called me, completely unaware of Bonnie's actions. After I explained the situation, he assured me that he had never agreed to abandon me and was certain our parents wouldn't want me excluded from the trip. His support was a relief amidst the chaos. However, soon after, my parents called, furious that I had cancelled Bonnie's ticket. They accused me of being petty and vindictive, but I stood my ground. I reminded them that I had planned and paid for this trip as a gift to the family, and if they didn't want me there, I could just as easily take a solo trip. I would not let Bonnie dictate the terms of my generosity. My parents revealed that they hadn't asked Bonnie to cancel my tickets, but they were also unhappy with my decision to cancel hers. They wanted the family to go together. I insisted that I wouldn't be pushed around, especially after the way Bonnie had treated me. Bonnie, meanwhile, was livid. She bombarded me with angry texts, calling me names and insulting my character. I forwarded these messages to my parents to show them how she was behaving. My dad then volunteered to mediate the situation, suggesting a conference call with Bonnie where she could apologize and I could rebook her ticket. I was skeptical but agreed, knowing she would likely refuse to apologize. When the call took place, my dad explained to Bonnie that her actions were mean-spirited and asked her to apologize. Instead, she snapped back, insisting she had done the right thing. After hearing her response, my dad hung up, unable to convince her. When I called him back, I pointed out how cruel Bonnie had been. He admitted he felt torn between us but didn't know what to do. Despite feeling sad about the rift, I believed I had made the right choice. I had hoped for a family trip, and even if my feelings toward Bonnie were strained, she was still my sister. My brother and I might not be affected, but I knew our parents would be bothered by her absence. As the day of the trip arrived, Bonnie continued to scheme. She tried to convince my brother to co-sponsor the trip with her, suggesting they could abandon me. My brother found this proposal laughable and asked if she even had the means to pay half of the trip. She hesitated, admitting she didn't have the money now but would pay him back later. He knew better, recognizing that she had no real job and often missed work. When Bonnie suggested going to Mexico instead, he burst out laughing, firmly refusing to trade a free trip to Hawaii for a paid trip to Mexico with her. In a last-ditch effort, Bonnie attempted to guilt-trip our parents about being excluded from the trip. Fortunately, they stood firm, stating that she needed to apologize to me if she wanted to go. However, my parents also urged me to be the bigger person, forgive Bonnie, and take her along, but I remained unmoved. On the day of departure, I arrived at the airport, where my brother was excited while our parents appeared disappointed. They had no choice but to accept that Bonnie wouldn't be joining us. As we boarded the plane, I could sense the tension. I noticed the disappointment in my parents' eyes when we arrived in Hawaii. Despite the initial discomfort, I executed my plans flawlessly, ensuring that everyone had the best time possible. We participated in a private luau, enjoyed snorkeling adventures, and even took a helicopter tour over the island. Gradually, my parents began to warm up to the trip, realizing that we could still have a wonderful family vacation, even without Bonnie. Throughout the week, the bond between my brother and me strengthened, and we created lasting memories in the beautiful setting of Hawaii. I received sporadic messages from Bonnie, filled with anger and accusations. She was still furious with me, and my parents occasionally checked in with her, but even they started to realize that her behavior was becoming unreasonable. We had just returned from our trip to Hawaii, where we made unforgettable memories, and the beauty of the place helped to ease some of the tension that had built up. While my parents were disappointed that Bonnie didn't join us, they appreciated the effort I put into making the trip enjoyable. After we returned, I discovered that Bonnie had blocked me on social media. She was upset with our parents for choosing me over her and expressed a desire to cut them off, although she couldn't since she still lived in their house. In her frustration, she called my brother a freeloader for siding with me and insisted that she never wanted to see me again. While it was painful to hear such things, I felt I had made the right decision in standing up for myself and setting boundaries. I don't regret it, but I do wish things could have turned out differently. I hope that someday Bonnie will realize she was on the wrong side of this conflict, and we might be able to mend our relationship. For now, I will hold on to the beautiful memories from our trip. In a comedic twist, Bonnie suggested Mexico as a backup plan for a family trip, as if anyone would choose that over our Hawaiian paradise. It was laughable to think anyone would swap such a stunning location for a trip funded by Bonnie, where my brother would likely end up as her unpaid Instagram photographer. Her idea of co-sponsoring a trip felt as unrealistic as imagining a unicorn riding a rainbow. It's sad that Bonnie couldn't see past her own entitlement to understand the damage she had caused in our family. I hope that one day she'll wake up and realize that burning bridges isn't the best way to get across the river. Until then, I'll cherish those amazing memories from Hawaii and the lessons learned. A few months passed, and I finally had another update on the saga surrounding my sister. I hadn't had the time to share my thoughts, especially after returning to work and needing to put in extra hours to make up for my leave. In the meantime, I imagined Bonnie must have been throwing tantrums at our parents about missing out on the trip. My brother and I filled our social media with family pictures from Hawaii, which was a fun way to reminisce about the good times. About 3 months after our return, I visited my parents and noticed that Bonnie's room was vacant. When I asked them about her, they informed me that she had finally moved out. It turns out she had been irresponsible with her life and career, missing work without valid reasons. Since she didn't have to worry about rent or food, she had been taking her responsibilities lightly. A year prior, my parents had started requiring her to pay rent for living at home. Initially, she had a meltdown, calling them mean and greedy. However, when my dad threatened to kick her out, she reluctantly agreed to pay rent. Over the course of a year, she only managed to pay for 3 months, continuously coming up with excuses for why she couldn't pay. After my parents returned from their trip, as expected, Bonnie exploded. They tried to calm her down, even bringing back gifts from Hawaii, but she threw them away right in front of them. Finally, my dad had enough of her entitlement. He told her to pack her bags, saying he was going to drop her off somewhere else. At that point, Bonnie's demeanor changed. She started sobbing and clinging to our mom, claiming she was acting out because she missed them and was hurt by being left alone. My mom, however, pointed out that Bonnie had brought this upon herself. Their decision to leave her behind was a result of her narcissistic behavior. In the end, my parents did not succumb to her manipulative tactics and moved her out. I believed they should have taken decisive action much earlier. After all, she was 24 years old without a proper job or any concrete plans for her future. She was still on our parents' insurance and drove their car. My dad found a small apartment for her and even paid 2 months' rent up front. I didn't like how she had everything served to her on a silver platter, but this situation was still better than allowing her to continue living in their house for free. The family remained concerned about Bonnie's well-being, believing that moving her out of their home was the best way to encourage her self-reliance. However, they were unaware of how resilient she truly was. A week ago, my mother called to provide me with updates about Bonnie's situation. My father had covered her rent for 2 months while she transitioned to her new apartment. During Bonnie's departure, my mother had also given her a supply of ready-to-eat meals and snacks to last her about a week. Despite this support, Bonnie began frequently visiting my parents' home, often staying until dinner time. My mother would end up offering her food, and soon Bonnie started spending the night there occasionally. At first, my parents tolerated this, thinking that she was simply missing home. However, when her visits continued even after 3 or 4 months, they decided it was time to confront her. In their conversation, Bonnie admitted that she had not paid her rent and was actually hiding from her landlord. Essentially, the 2 months of rent my father had paid were her only contributions to her living situation. When my mother inquired about what Bonnie had done with her salary, Bonnie mentioned that she had spent it on shoes for work. This revelation frustrated my mother, who offered to loan Bonnie some money to clear her rent arrears. But Bonnie insisted that she should move back in with my parents instead. At this point, my father intervened and firmly stated that he was done bailing Bonnie out. He emphasized that it was time for her to take charge of her own life. When Bonnie attempted to guilt-trip them by claiming that they were abandoning their daughter, my father remained resolute. He told her that her manipulation tactics wouldn't work anymore and warned that if she approached them for help again, they wouldn't answer the door. While I understand my father's position, I found his stance somewhat harsh. However, I could see how exasperated he had become. In her desperation, Bonnie reached out to my brother for help, but he was living paycheck to paycheck and could not assist her financially. He suggested that she ask me for support, but Bonnie refused, saying that it would boost my ego and make her feel like a failure. When she asked my brother to borrow money under the pretense that he needed it for himself so he could then lend it to her, he quickly decided to disengage from the situation. He informed her that if she needed financial assistance, she should ask me directly. Bonnie pleaded with him not to mention this to me, but he was clear that he couldn't keep secrets, leading to her calling him derogatory names like bootlicker and pet for his loyalty to me. Listening to these stories, I felt a mix of disbelief and annoyance at Bonnie's entitled behavior. Someone needed to call her out, and I was glad that I had been the first to do so. I remember how my parents initially tried to gaslight the situation, insisting that Bonnie should be included in family gatherings. I was relieved when they finally recognized how toxic Bonnie was and how she had been manipulating them by playing the daughter card. 3 months later, I learned that Bonnie's room at my parents' house was vacant. It seemed she had finally been evicted from their home after a year of dodging rent payments, offering excuses that likely ranged from "the dog ate my checkbook" to claims of spending money on essential life upgrades, like shoes. It was evident that my parents had unknowingly set up a freeloading arrangement, allowing Bonnie to turn their house into her personal restaurant and hotel while avoiding her landlord. While it took my parents a while to catch on, I was relieved they finally put their foot down. Although this was a tough love lesson for Bonnie, it was necessary. I hope she eventually figures out how to manage her life, but I won't be holding my breath. What are your thoughts on the situation? Share them in the comments below. Thank you for joining us today. We appreciate your engagement, and we look forward to sharing more in the future.